Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News for this Friday, the 12th day of July, 2024. And we're going to begin the program today by looking at the aftermath of the press conference of Joe Biden yesterday, the fact that he went on for almost an hour, what it means with respect to the Democrat Party, but more importantly, what it means with respect to Bible prophecy. How does all this fit in with the last days, what the scripture says our world will be like at the time of the end? Because that's what we do every day here on Breaking News. We don't just look at stories that are interesting news. We only look at stories that have something to do with the specific predictions of the Bible, of the state of the world before the second coming of Jesus Christ and all the events that are predicted that will precede it. And that's what we're going to do today. That's what we do every day. So we have an understanding of God's program, where we're at, and all of that. And we do have some exciting news again today with all this going on. First and foremost, Biden's press conference yesterday turned out to be the worst possible outcome for the Democrat Party. Why? Well, the bar was set so low. The fact that he talked for almost an hour was actually seen as a victory from some people. They actually thought he did a good job by even standing up for an hour, not fainting or walking off in some glaze. Sky News Australia host, she hit the nail on the head. The news commentator said, U.S. President Joe Biden needs help. There's an obvious mental problem here. And this obvious to all, but see, the bar has been set so low. The fact that he can continue on means he's able to fight another day. And so if the Hollywood big donors, as we see, they're all closing their wallets, not going to help Biden, it seems, in this, at least for now, in their fight for the nomination. If he gets the nomination, they're seemingly not supporting him because they don't think he can win. His own inner circle, like we talked about yesterday, does not think he can win. And Hollywood is basically it. It's a one-stop shop for all candidates on the left because they put the real big money into the election. So this is not good. It doesn't bode well for the Democrats. They're scrambling. Like one person said, this is the worst possible outcome, what could have happened yesterday. So we will see how this all fits in. Now, finally, though, we got some really good news from Israel. Hamas is teetering on the brink, and Netanyahu is keeping his foot on the gas to finish the job. So, lots of news to talk about. Let's get to it. Headline number one: Democrat Party in limbo as Biden presser buys him breathing room. The Democrat Party is left in limbo as President Joe Biden's NATO press conference avoided total disaster. And that's how low the bar was set, despite several gaffes, and it could stave off internal efforts among Democrats to remove him as the nominee in the immediate future. One Democrat source told Fox News White House correspondent Jackie Henrich that Biden's performance Thursday was the worst possible outcome, as fears mount about Biden destroying the hopes of the down ballot Democrats in his wake. In other words, every 2 years, the House of Representatives, every member is up for re-election, and 1/3 of the Senate. The same thing is going to happen this November, and they're afraid because of Biden's performance that the Senate will be lost. The House of Representatives will continue on the side of the Republicans, and they figure it's one total disaster. The source quipped in a follow-up that is the worst possible result unless you are Hunter, that is his son, and need a pardon. He's the only one that he's going to gain from this. Heinrich responded, because it prolongs him stepping down, and the source texts back, yes, it does prolong that. Now, Biden's former White House Secretary Jen Psaki said on MSNBC that she thinks the press conference gave Biden campaign more time, which for the campaign is a win. And there are people around him that still say he's going to win. He's our candidate. And so, there's no talk and no chance of him leaving, as we saw yesterday, as the candidate. Now, especially vulnerable Democrats who are running for re-election in states that are basically red or Republican have come under intense scrutiny regarding where they stand in their support for Biden after the debate and after this horrific press conference yesterday. Though Biden steered clear of a disastrous performance, like in the debate, wasn't totally disastrous, he still had several gaffes throughout his remarks at the press conference. We can add he was slurring his words. His thoughts were incomprehensible. At times he made mistakes. I've created 2,000 more jobs in the last week. Well, he meant to say 200,000. And so he made mistake after mistake like that, but he talked so fast and he slurred his words and he kept changing the subject. No one could follow him. At the beginning of his remarks, as we know, he introduced Ukrainian Vice President Volodymyr Zelensky as President Putin before correcting himself. Then he erroneously called President Donald Trump his vice president, evoking a visceral reaction from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. So it wasn't, in a normal world, this would be an absolute disaster. But because his debate performance was so horrible, so awful, the fact that he even could talk for an hour seems to some as a victory. And so the beat goes on. Now, so that brings us to our second headline. Biden survives another day because there's an ultra low bar that was set for him. The fact that he talked for almost an hour and didn't faint was seen as a victory. Like we said, among some Democrats, LA Times actually read an article they had. They praised him for his performance. They actually thought he did a good job, believe it or not. But reality sets in. Now, there's an interesting comment about the reality of the state of the economy with respect to his domestic policy. I want to read this to you because this kind of sets the stage where America's at right now. The commentators, there's comment back and forth about his domestic policy. And here's what this person says. You missed the point. Before Biden, we ate at home and treated ourselves to a night out on the town on occasion. Bidenomics has robbed us of our disposable discretionary income because of high fuel costs, high food costs, high housing costs, high insurance costs. The loss of neighborhood restaurants because of the pandemic leaves few options for a night out on the town. In California, Newsom's $20 minimum wage in certain fast food establishments has left a bleak future for the industry. Ain't nothing good with the current regime's domestic policy against the American middle class. And this is done by design. With the globalist worldview, basically there's two classes, the haves and the have-nots. There's really no middle class. There's the ruling class and the rest of us. And so what they're trying to do is literally rid the world of the middle class. And Biden's doing a great job of doing this in America. The local restaurants, we've seen so many close in our area here. My wife and I rarely go out anymore. We used to treat ourselves once in a while, but now we don't even feel the need of doing that because prices are so high. And we feel bad for the different restaurants, people we know there who become our friends. But on the other hand, it just doesn't make sense to do this. And this is what we're seeing everywhere. So when he talks about the reality of his economic programs, it's ridiculous. The American people know much better. They know that this is not the reality. Now, Sky News, if this is an interesting one, if you ever watch Sky News Australia, got Gabriella Power and their different hosts there. They basically every day make fun of what's going on in America. They can't believe we've elected a guy that does this. And she said, Joe Biden needs help after making several blunders at his make or break press conference. Hours before the press conference at the NATO summit, Joe Biden accidentally referred to the leader of Ukraine as President Putin. Ms. Power said it's excruciatingly painful watching Joe Biden become the laughingstock of the world. The American people deserve better than this. Ms. Power says he has all the signs of a medical condition. He needs help. Now, this is what an objective person sees, and this is what the rest of the world sees when this man gets up and talks in front of people, whether it be a campaign rally, a press conference, or a debate. He is just not in his right mind. And to have the leader of the free world like this is beyond ridiculous. Yet this is who's leading us. Now, which leads us to headline number 4. And this is where it becomes really problematic for the Democrats. Hollywood, Hartz, and Wallace are abandoning Joe Biden. The most powerful chemical in the solvent driving a presidential campaign is money. Lots and lots of money, as Mr. Wonderful would say. Hollywood has traditionally been a steadfast financial pillar for Democratic candidates, yet more and more of its gilded elites are rejecting Joe Biden in his 2024 quest to return to office. George Clooney is just one of the wealthy donors urging the U.S. president withdraw from the White House race, as Breitbart News reported. He says, I love Joe Biden, as we mentioned, but we need a new nominee, he wrote in the New York Times recently, this last Wednesday, about his disastrous performance in the televised presidential debate against Trump. Although he raised $30 million in one evening, he said, seeing him off, behind the scenes personally, that he's not the same candidate the Joe Biden he knew before a couple years ago, even of the last year or two. He's really lost it. He's kind of walking around in a fog. And of course, Clooney says this 3 weeks later. Why didn't he say anything at the time? Because it's going to be obvious to all, and it has been with the debate in the forefront. But anyway, the bottom line is, if big donors pull out, he's sunk. This is what professor of history at the University of Southern California, who wrote a book on the influence of Hollywood on American politics, told the AFP. Hollywood is still the one-shop stop for candidates. So this is the one place you have to go if you're a Democrat on the left to get the big money you need to produce a decent campaign. The advertising to get the people out. But the problem is the A-listers and the Hollywood's left-leaning group have pulled their support. And if they do that, then Joe Biden is the proverbial toast. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see. And so this is the situation we're in. Now, why this is important is because the Bible talks about who's a player in last days Bible prophecy. And as we talk about here, and as we emphasize every day, we deal with Israel, we deal with Russia, we deal with Iran, we look at Europe, simply because that's where the action is going to be in the last days. And the stories that evolve from there tell us where we're at in the Bible, with respect to last days Bible prophecy end time scenario. And so the United States, by its losing its influence, shows the truth of what we've talked about in our book, 25 Signs We're Near the End, sign 9 through 11, when we talk about the Ezekiel 38-39 last days invasion of Israel, where all these nations get involved, led by Russia. This group of coalition of nations invades Israel. No one comes to Israel's aid. There's a few protests from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states called Sheba and Dedan in the Bible, but there's no one who will come to Israel's aid. And the leader of this organization of this coalition, the Russian leader, knows this, and that's why he has no second thoughts about invading the country, which means obviously that the United States isn't there. We're not a player. We're not a force to be reckoned with. And we've said for years, because of this, sadly, we should expect to see the demise of the United States in the sight of the world. And it's precisely what we are seeing right now. It's sad to say, but this is exactly what we are seeing. And this sets the stage for what's going to take place with the United States out of action, not coming to the aid of Israel when Israel needs it the most. But the good news is someone will come to the aid of Israel, and that is the God of the Bible, and destroy the invading armies, as we document not only in our book, 25 Signs We're Near the End, signs 9 through 11, but we have an entire book on the subject, the Ezekiel 38-39 scenario. Go to our website, Educating Our World, and under the heading of Bible prophecy, we have 12 books on the subject. 2 books on the rapture of the church, the book on the final Antichrist, the Jews, Jerusalem, the coming temple. And so we have a number of subjects there with respect to what's going on in the world and what will go on in great detail. Now, everything is free. This is our ministry. We're not charging for anything. We never charge. We, want you to have this material because we want you to understand what is taking place. So what is going on here with the U.S. is something that we assumed that we would eventually see. Sadly, again, we're not happy for this, but this is something that seems to be an eventuality, because when it comes time for this last day's invasion, nowhere anybody is found that will come to the aid of Israel militarily. Now, some good news, though, in our last headline, number 5, Netanyahu hardens his stance as Hamas weakness is revealed. As talks resume, the Mossad chief backs the prime minister. Defense Minister Gallant claims 60% of Hamas's fighters are neutralized. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has taken a tougher stance in the last round of talks, as reports suggest that Hamas is weakening and nearing collapse. Backing his position, Mossad Chief David Barnea has echoed sentiments that the militant group is running out of ammunition and supplies. Unlike other Israeli officials, Bibi has decided to play hardball, ready to pursue Sinwar into his presumed subterranean lair. In other words, get after this leader and find out where he is. Prime Minister Netanyahu is resolute in his position, stated an official from the Prime Minister's office. The perceived weakening of Hamas is a strategic opportunity that cannot be ignored. He's exactly right. He's listed 4 non-negotiable conditions for a deal. They're iron principles. In fact, he's tough on the 2 of the ones later in the week. He has said Israel, we must not allow that any deal must allow Israel to resume fighting until all the goals of the war are achieved. It also must prevent weapons from being smuggled into Gaza from Egypt, primarily by means of the Israel control of this Philadelphia corridor that runs across. We've talked about this as 8-mile corridor that runs across the Gaza-Egypt border and the Rafah border crossing. This is a day after Minister Yoav Gallant appeared to offer some leeway regarding the Gaza-Egypt border corridor, and Netanyahu rightly said no. we're going to have to take control of this because there's no way we can let any weapons, any munitions come in from Egypt anymore, any help, and they can't go back. They can't hide either, run away from Egypt and escape. And so, again, he's been making this a priority. He said any deal also must prevent the return of armed terrorists and the entry of weapons to the north of the Strip. And finally, he said any deal must be already in the first stage of the framework, maximize the number of living hostages that would be free. He says, if Israel stands behind these conditions, we will achieve a deal that will free our hostages and ensure we will continue to fight until all aims are achieved. The way to free the hostages is to continue pressure Hamas with all of our strength. And he is exactly right. So we'll see how that all works out. His toughened stance is something that's a breath of fresh air. His fortified position has the majority of Israelis on his side because you got to get the job done. You can't go this far and not do it. All right. So where are we at with all this? As we emphasized yesterday, Biden is not going anywhere as more and more Democrats call for him to step down. The rest of the world mocks the U.S. for having a person like this in charge, a man who is obviously compromised mentally and physically. If he is their candidate, then nobody on the Democratic side thinks he's going to win. Now, this would be true in a fair election, so let's not assume that the election is over. It is not. We're just telling you where we're at right now. The U.S. has been on a downward spiral for years. 4 more years of the same would eventually would certainly spell our doom. If we have a Democrat, administration coming in 2025, if they win the presidential election, then we're doomed. Even if we don't, though, even if Donald Trump wins, it's hard to climb back out of the hole that Biden has put us in, that the U.S. is in right now. And again, all this to say that the biblical scenario, the U.S. conspicuous by its absence, obviously will not be a player, according to the end time scenario, particularly signs 9 through 11 in our book. 25 signs were near the end. Now, on the other hand, Israel will survive despite all the attacks of every side, militarily, politically, etc. So if you want to know how God's plan is turning out, keep our eyes on the Middle East, keep our eyes on Israel, keep our eyes on Iran, Russia. This is where the action is, and that's why we emphasize these stories every day, because as far as the Bible is concerned, that's where the events at the time of the end will take place, and that's where the emphasis is, and that's why we emphasize that here. All right, enough for this edition of Breaking News. Obviously, we'll do another one later, as we do every day, and bring you up to date with what's happened since this morning. I'm Don Stewart. Thank you so much for watching, and again, be encouraged with all that's going on, because the Lord